Hey everyone, it's Liam here from Solitude again. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the top 10 bands from Australia who had success here in this country but never broke out overseas. So Australia being very isolated from the world means that sometimes we have things here that happen in our culture and in our country that we're all aware of being Australians, but the rest of the world don't really hear about. And music is one of the big things when it comes to this. So there have been countless bands and artists who have had huge success here in Australia, but for whatever reason, never got attention overseas. Now, on my list of 10 here, I've got artists who may have had like one or two songs that might have just charted in a country overseas, but not to the extent of what I would call like a success. And most of these artists never had any songs chart overseas at all. All right, here's my number 10. So this is a band who were big in the 70s, and they had one big song in particular. People love to talk about this song, especially on my channel. It's a very big, famous Australian song, and they also had a few other hits around the time of this song coming out. And their lead singer also went on to have some success in some other outfits and bands as well. But they're mostly well known for their one huge song, which is famous for people taking their pants down at the pub when it comes on. Okay, my number 9 artist here were a, what would you call them? Alternative rock band from the 90s. They kind of rode the wave of that underground takeover in the early 90s after Nirvana came out. They were almost kind of like Australia's Nirvana to a degree. They were kind of like flying the flag there for alternative rock in the 90s. And yeah, they were really big in the 90s. They were kind of like the most respected band there for a while in the 90s, I reckon. And some of the albums that they put out were, hugely successful. One in particular, was really on point with the Australian commentary that it came out with. It's one of my favorite Australian albums of all time. They still get around nowadays. They still put out music. And they're extremely well respected here in Australia, but just not known overseas at all. Maybe because of the fact that they kind of delved into Australian culture a bit in their content. Okay, number 8. It's a band where the singer's name is in the band, and he has his and the part of the band as well. And this guy was huge in Australia in mostly the 70s, I believe. He had one really big song in particular, which you know him for, but he had other hits too. He was one of the first. He was one of the first bands. The guy who was in the band. Well, this was one of the first bands who went along with that Mushroom label with Michael Gudinski, and they had huge success together, and they kind of like created the slipstream for other Mushroom artists to come through. And yeah, this guy was like one of those ones that kind of like was really well respected in that era of 70s Australian rock kind of coming through, where was like that kind of hippie movement, drugs, free love, all that. He was there. He was one of those guys, but he didn't break through into the other countries.
Those people I know think that I'm crazy. I know at times I act a little hasty.
Okay, number 7 now. A punk rock band from the 70s mostly here in Australia. And they were one of the big few punk rock bands in this country, riding that wave of punk phenomenon in the 70s, with the Ramones and with the Sex Pistols. And in Australia, we had the Saints. But the Saints actually did get a little bit of notoriety overseas, and people noticed them. But this band didn't really get noticed overseas for whatever reason. But, I think they're kind of up there with the Saints when it comes to Australian punk. They're maybe arguably a little more harder edged than the Saints. They're kind of a little bit more shouty. Maybe their music goes a little harder. But yeah, here in Australia, we usually have a lot of respect for them as a groundbreaking punk artist, but they just didn't get out into the international market.
It's gotta be a new race. Kids are gonna start it over. Now I'm gonna be a day. Kids are saying, yeah, huh.
Okay, number 6. It's the most successful rap hip-hop band from Australia, hands down, easily. If you follow Australian music, you probably know who I'm talking about already, just from me saying that. They have had so much success in Australia, especially over the past 25 years, I guess I would say. They've arguably been the biggest band of any genre over the past 25 years consistently. They've consistently put out music over that time period, and it's been on both Triple J, the underground radio stations, as well as the mainstream stations as well, for that pretty much entire time period. They win arias. They often support the big hip-hop artists that come here to Australia. But they didn't resonate overseas, and I guess maybe a big reason why is because they rap in Aussie accents. So maybe that just feels a little bit too off for the international market. But massive in Australia, nothing really overseas for them. Okay, number 5. It's a pub rock band from the 70s and 80s in Australia. One of the big ones. They were huge in that era. They're still huge now when it comes to like classic rock, the Triple M sort of scene. This band get, a good maybe 5 or 6 songs of theirs constantly played on stations like that. They have one song in particular which is very famous here in Australia. It's very well known for having a crowd interaction part in the chorus where they sing a line back where they're swearing at the band, which is it's hilarious when it happens, but it's iconic for Australia. You probably know who I'm talking about right now, but they did have a couple of songs, I believe, kind of chart overseas, but nowhere near like top 10s or anything. Maybe not even top 40s, I don't think, from memory. But yeah, they're quintessentially Australian, didn't break out overseas at all, really. So here they are on my list.
Am I ever gonna see your face again? Am I ever gonna see your face again?
Okay, number 4. Now, I totally understand why this band didn't break out overseas, and it might be because of their name, because their name has the name of this country in their name. So if you name yourself after a country that you come from, I feel like you're kind of setting yourself up to not really get out overseas a whole lot. But you know what? They still sounded really good here in Australia. People still really respect them to this day. They're still really big in that classic rock radio station scene, Triple M sort of stuff. I'd say they probably have at least a dozen songs that get played consistently on classic rock radio. And I believe they were kind of like Australia's answer to the Police. I think they even supported the Police at some concerts that they did here in this country. Okay, number 3. The biggest band, arguably, from the early sort of 70s era of rock music in Australia. And they were another one who kind of went along with that Mushroom scene. This band was probably the one actually that helped Mushroom go from a nice up and coming label to arguably the biggest label and name in the Australian music scene because of the success of their album, which made the Mushroom label and brand a lot of money. Their music was quintessentially Australian. It spoke about Australian things and Australian culture. They kind of had an Australian accent when they sang. They were noticeable for dressing up kind of funny when they performed live. So they were kind of like noticeable. I think back in the 70s, a lot of people probably didn't like the way they dressed up. People probably thought that they were silly and, for dressing up. Essentially kind of like in drag almost. Like they would have a lot of makeup and stuff. Okay, my number 2 band now. And this band were prominent in the 90s and 2000s here in Australia. They were arguably one of, if not the biggest. I'm going to say they were the second biggest band from like 95 to 2010 in that period. The first biggest band being like Silverchair. This band was like the second rung underneath. They put out heaps of great songs in this time period, many of which did really well in that kind of Triple J scene. They got multiple songs that were voted into the Hottest 100, including 2 at number 1. And yeah, they were kind of like the alternative rock darlings of Australia of that time period. A kind of almost a little bit like almost like Australia's answer to U2 in that time period. I feel like that's a weird comparison in a way, but if you kind of think about it, they were kind of like that 90s era U2, 90s and 2000s era U2. That's kind of like what this band were similar sounding to. And people just loved them, They sold out huge arenas here in Australia. They tried their hand overseas, but people just didn't resonate with their music for some reason. And we don't know why. All right, my number 1 band who were so big here in Australia but never broke out overseas, and I think it's an obvious number 1. They're arguably one of, if not the biggest Australian bands of all time. If you just like asked Australians, if you took out international fans, this could well be the most popular Australian band for Australians. They pushed themselves forward really through word of mouth and their live shows. And eventually they kind of got picked up by some of the mainstream outlets like Countdown. They didn't really want to go on there for a while, I heard. But yeah, eventually they did go on there. And they were just so popular amongst young people in the 80s that, everyone just loved them. They tried their hand overseas, but I think that there were issues internally within the band. I've heard also that they were maybe screwed over by some sort of like thing that was out of their hands with like managers or labels or something. I'm not exactly sure about that, but essentially I think when they tried to get overseas, I think it pushed them to the limit and they ended up kind of breaking up. And it was interesting because after that, when they broke up, that's when their music really started to get traction in the mainstream, and they started to get played on classic rock radio a lot more, and they've just continued to. They're probably arguably the most played band on that kind of like Triple M type radio station that plays classic Australian and classic rock. They've easily got somewhere between 10 or 15 songs which consistently get airplay. They've got one song in particular that many Australians believe it to be the greatest song from this country of all time. So they're easily my number 1, and this is them. Thanks for checking out this video, everyone. Are there any other bands that you think didn't have success overseas but were big in Australia that I should have mentioned in this list? Chuck them in the comments below. If you like what you saw today, please come back for another one. So like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.